We know that there is a real lack of faith today in our institutions, in government, corporations, in political parties. And as you think about your own experiences, I want to ask each of you, what advice would you offer today to turn it around from your own experiences? What are your insights to what we can do differently? And I want to start with you, President Clinton.
Well, I think, first of all, we have to recognize what is legitimate behind the disillusion with the current economic and social and political order all over the world. The facts may be different in different countries, but you shouldn't defend the indefensible. And as George said, you know, that you shouldn't claim that yesterday's answers will fit today's challenges. What is legitimate? We have entered a period of growing inequality in the world, which has made it harder to get along in countries poor and rich alike. There is a long tail on the 2008 financial crash, which has prevented us from going back to shared prosperity. There are different conditions in different countries which this plays out in terms of economic inequality, and therefore the challenges are different about what to do about it. But that's a real problem. Second thing is, we got to figure out how to do it and deal with the challenge of climate change. And the third thing is, we are having a global identity crisis. Globalization is having growing pains. When borders look more like nets than walls, it's a really good deal for most of you. We can embrace our diversity because we're smart enough to figure out that one of America's greatest assets, for example, is that we have the youngest, most diverse workforce in the world, and the world is not going to get less globalized no matter how much you try to make it so. On the other hand, it's hard for some people to know what the rules are, what the economic rules are, what the social rules are, how to make their way in the present, much less how to guarantee their kids can make a way in the future. So what we should be doing is trying to tell people how more people can claim the advantages that have put you in these seats today, and how we can do it together. Instead, what we seem bent on doing is building resentment against people that disagree with us on anything, maybe that look differently than we do, or pretending that we'd really be better off if we separated out more by religion or culture or race. This is almost only semi-political thing, I will say, but I'm always kidding President Bush. He may be the last Republican president who wasn't afraid of immigrants. That is, he would have been happy to go with me. He would have been happy to go with me to South Texas and let us have a debate about what the best economic policy was for first-generation immigrants. And he would have trusted himself and what he believed to think that he could get enough of those votes to win. And that's like me. I'm happy to go into places where there are no Democrats left among white working-class people, because I was one of them as a child. And I don't think they should be left out and left behind. And I think we got to get back to that. This idea of delegitimizing people as people because we disagree with them politically, or because we're in a different place than they are economically or socially now, is crazy. And we got a good model now, a fresh one. We always need new models. The police chief in Dallas, Texas. He is our model, right? With that African American in law enforcement who lost a child to mental illness, crime, and violence between the community and the police, and stood up both for the reforms necessary for all Americans to feel safe when they walk outside and they're not breaking the law, and the necessity of maintaining safe streets and safe neighborhoods and a future we can all share. Every American needs to learn something from that. living with venom and bile in your heart and thinking of ways to demean people just because they disagree with you is a very dumb way to run a railroad. The best way to take advantage of all these differences is to do what you do. Sit in groups, have debates, and figure out some way to get the show on the road. Very often, how you do it is almost as important as the particular thing you decide to do. And that's all I can tell you. That's all I've learned in my long life that I think will be likely applicable throughout the end of time as long as democratic societies exist. You always have to change them. You have to have reforms and institutions. You have to do all that stuff. But you can never run a successful society based on the delegitimization of people as people just because they disagree with you. And you live in a world when I thought, when I was listening to that wonderful speech, I wish that everybody could listen to the speech, because we live in a Snapchat, Twitter world in which people form these images and react in a hurry. And this is good, that's bad. Anyway, that's whatever it's worth. We are having inevitable growing pains in our global interdependence, economically, socially, politically. Some of them raise questions that are worth raising and worth asking. Maybe the pace is too great, maybe this or that bureaucracy doesn't work so great, maybe this or the other thing. All I know is we're in the best position of any country on earth because we have the youngest, most diverse workforce, and yet the things that are holding us back are objectively identifiable. Therefore, you cannot convince me that we couldn't get together and come up with a set of steps we could all take that would get the show on the road if we were more interested in listening to and learning from each other than delegitimizing people as people because they disagree with us.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. President Bush.
I can't remember the question.
The question really has...
Felt like it was about 12 minutes ago. Anyway.
This is all about how do we rebuild trust
Okay.
in our
I think one thing that we've got to recognize that institutions are important. So one of the things that I admire about the presidency, it's the presidency is more important than the occupant. Because, believe it or not, both of us have got strengths and weaknesses. And yet the institutional protection against the weaknesses is really important for our country. Therefore, as the world kind of churns around, and Bill's right about the globalization and the pressures, my advice is to strengthen the institutions that have made us a remarkable country. Religion, really important for our country. The right to choose, the right to be able to speak freely. There's going to be great pressure to muzzle voices, but it's really important that we not do that, no matter how harsh they sound. And so there are, again, this is back kind of the initial question. You know, when you look at our history, I mean, the history of our presidencies and prime ministership, man, there was a lot of change. People are saying, "Oh man, these guys they're leading at times of enormous change." Now we're talking about change. That's a constant, but there are also other constants. And I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. Leadership is a constant. The willingness to define principles that won't change as the basis for making decisions is, I think, a remedy to dealing with a very uncertain world.
Thank you. Prime Minister Blair?
The interesting thing is this conversation is happening in America, but it could be happening in my country or any country I can think of in the whole of Europe right now. And I think there are really important reasons that you can analyze, like globalization, the feeling of people being left behind by it, the flatlining of certain income groups, and the belief that they're not participating in a world of opportunity. And I think all of those things are really important. But then I think there is an additional dimension that the other two speakers didn't touch on, so let me touch on particularly, which is the way the debate happens today is in a much more fragmented way than before, and in a way that lends itself much more to partisan exchange rather than trying to find common ground. And this is a very important thing because, you know, the technology and the way we communicate today is just a fact. So, I mean, you can like it or not like it, it doesn't really matter. It's with us. But one of the first things you learn as a leader in politics, but I think in any walk of life, is that those who shout loudest don't necessarily deserve to be heard most. Right? But the way our debate goes at the moment is there's a lot of loud-mouthing in the way that the debate takes place. And what that does, particularly when the traditional forms of media have then become fragmented, and you get people locked in their own circle, where they communicate within their own circle, and they more or less, they increase their own sense of identity and belonging, but within a circle that's quite narrow, right? That is, I think, something that then discolors the whole of the debate and makes it much more difficult to have in a way that is constructive. And I think one thing, because, as I say, this could be happening anywhere in the Western world, certainly right now, we need, therefore, to think about ways in which we reach across the divide. And those of you who are going to be leaders on this scholarship program, those of you occupying positions of leadership, aspiring to positions of leadership, you know, some of the distrust, I think, and lack of faith comes from the fact that you have this very polarized and partisan exchange, and then what people want to do is they want to attack people's motives for having a position and not actually engage in a debate. And so I think this is going to be this is one actual growing pain of political evolution that we're going to have to go through. And I only hope we don't have to go through too many harsh, living, actual examples of this type of very narrow partisan politics taking over countries or situations in order for us to realize it's not a very productive way of conducting our affairs. So, but I think, you know, one of the things that all of you who are going to take these positions of leadership should just bear in mind is anyone who's in a position of leadership today, they're in a harsher environment. There's a big wall of noise all around you. And that's why I think those of you who are prepared to take these positions have a certain courage actually in doing it, but it's absolutely necessary that you do it, because without people like yourselves who do actually have good motives and a good heart in trying to make the world better, without people like yourselves stepping forward and engaging with these positions of leadership, then our world is going to go backwards and not forwards. So this is what I think we need today, and you need it here, but we need it in my country. I mean, you said there's been a lot of change here in America in the last few years. There's been a lot of change in my country in the last few weeks. But I want to get to the stage where people once more engage in a debate that is civilized and decent, and where people accept that they can disagree but still find common ground, because that's in the interest of the country.